The world has come together to celebrate the life and work of celebrated cleric Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Mpilo Tutu, who died on Sunday at the age of 90. The renowned religious leader was hailed for his stance on the protection of human rights and the protection of the most vulnerable in society. We're now joined by a man who covered him as a story subject, but also worked with him. Chris More, he's a former journalist. He also worked with the late Archbishop Mpilo Desmond Tutu at the Council of Churches. And Dr. More, thank you so much for making the time to talk to us.
Good morning, Desiree, and thank you. And good morning to the viewers of SABC Agenda.
Now, you were privileged to get a front row seat watching the different parts of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, growing up with his kids, Trevor and Mpho, and then as a journalist covering some of his stories, and then he was your boss at the South African Council of Churches. Did you feel the magnitude of this interaction, or was it just life unfolding for you?
Well, there is one thing that is very clear. When you are with great people, you do feel it. The Arch had a presence about him that really impacted on everyone, and it impacted on me in a very great way. But, you know, the Arch was what one would call a larger-than-life figure, you know, and you could never miss his presence. But also, by the time I first got to know him, he was already a very important person. And so one always felt that you are in the presence of a great man. But as the years developed, as his commitment to the cause was emphasized in thought, in word, and in deed, it became very clear that the Arch was destined to be a very great and important person. And so, yes, he impacted on me in a very significant way, but mostly in a very pleasant way, because, you know, the Arch, being the orator he was always one with a word for any situation. And being in his presence, one always had a different perspective to life. And it was really great to be in his presence.
A lot has been said about his moral compass and his ability to calm down angry crowds. You were there at the much talked about funeral where he averted the attack on a perceived sellout. Tell us about that day. What happened?
Well, I must say, at this time in my life, I feel quite embarrassed about that situation, because the Arch, being a man of peace, committed to nonviolence, and a truly brave man. You know, he's been described as brave in terms of his attack and challenge of apartheid. But little did people really realize how brave he was, that he would stand in the midst of marauding comrades who were eager to meet justice to the sellouts, as was the case in this funeral. The Arch braved the crowd to go and stop the comrades from lynching this man. They actually took him out of his car, beat him up, and their plan was that they were going to throw him into his burning car so that he would die a painful death in repayment for the very comrades that they had come to their graveyard to bury. So it was a rather unfortunate situation that that man, to this day, is not quite clear who he was, why he was there, because, you know, at the funerals of comrades, you know, we wear, you know, war regalia. And here was this guy wearing a suit and a tie, and it might just as well be that the man was just coming to a funeral, but he stuck like a sore thumb with his tie and suit. But there had also been word that agents of the system were going to come to the funeral and cause havoc. And indeed they did, because they came in a couple of cars and they fired shots at the mourners at the funeral. And one of the mourners who was shot, we know for a fact, was one of the journalists, Rapiti Munchun. But, with word already being out that there may be sellouts amongst them, their comrades were very swift to act on that. And sadly to say, even though I had gone to that event as a journalist, I was on the side of the comrades. And I remonstrated with the bishop, trying to stop him from saving the life of this man. And fortunately, the higher power prevailed, because the arch was with Deacon Ngwani, whom he was able to get to take the man away from the crowds while he was calming the crowds and calling them to order. You can imagine being amidst people who are like very, very angry and death in both their eyes, in their tongue, and in their hearts, wanting to get rid of this man. And the arch, he just stood there, fought them back. And for me, that was really a crowning moment where the arch really lived his principle of fighting injustice with justice.
Chris, take us back to the mood of the day where, for argument's sake, for yourself as a journalist, where the lines were blurred between your journalism work and being an activist under the apartheid time.
Well, Desiree, our lives were ever at stake, even as journalists. I was telling my family that God is really gracious, because almost on a daily basis, one escaped death, either from the system or even from amongst your own, amongst the comrades, because there were situations where there was intolerance for journalists, for media people in general. And we were considered as being agents of the state in some form or other.
Yeah.
And that was in some way justified, because for instance, especially television journalists, the system used its authority to usurp the footage that was filmed by journalists, and they would use that footage to identify activists in the struggle.
Chris,
as journalists, we were both.
We have to go to another.
We were both on the side of.
Chris,
I can't get you.
We have to go to another story quickly, but I want to ask you this question quickly because it's been out there. You said that you knew him as a man of his word, but that your lowest point was when at the TRC, he tried to force Winnie Madikizela-Mandela to concede to atrocities which were perpetuated by the system. There are various views about this time, with some analysis saying he was asking her to atone for the activities of the so-called Nelson Mandela Football Club and the killing of Stompie Sipay. As a journalist, how did you interact with this exchange between Winnie and the Arch?
Yeah, Desiree, it's a pity that the time is so limited. But just to talk about the Mandela Football Club, the agents of the state made it very clear, even during the TRC, that they were used, and they used any opportunity to subvert the intentions of the struggle and to discredit the struggle. And they knew that by discrediting Mrs. Mandela, Madikizela Mandela, they would put shame onto the struggle. So Mama Winnie made it very clear that she had no part in the killing of Stompie. And we know that Mama Mandela did not have a part in the killing of Stompie. But she also had a very unique position. Desiree, Mama Mandela's house was one of the few places that comrades fleeing from the system anywhere in the country would go to that house and knock on the door any time of day or night. That door would open. And so it became a very easy system, or a easy opportunity for the system to use it to plant people who were counter-revolutionaries. So the situation of the Mandela Football Club is something that as a nation we really needed to get into and understand the dynamics therein, because that football club was actually a sanctuary for boys who were running away from various parts of the country, while she made contact with the exiled movement to make way for these boys to get out of the country. So it's not a situation where we can just say it was the Mandela Football Club and a club of thugs, because the members of that club were never stationary, or I'm using a bad word. They were never the same at any given time. It was really a transfer or a thoroughfare for people who were running away from the state.
Like we said, time constraints, but thank you so much for making the time this morning to speak to us. Chris Murray is a former journalist and now businessman, but former colleague of Archbishop Desmond Tutu at the South African Council of Churches.